And it's another Second Act show with me, John Tarnoff, and my lovely co-host.
I'm Carrie Hannon. Great to be here.
So today, Carrie, and this is a bit of a reach, but boomers will understand this. We are the Stiller and Mira, the Jerry Stiller and Ann Mira of Second Act careers.
Excellent. Good
A bit
going.
recherche.
I knew you could come up with a new one.
Yep. A little bit unexpected. So today we kind of continue, I think, in the tradition of the Second Act show party, where we have our good friend Andy Levine on the show, who is the co-host with Scott Merritt of Second Act Stories. And this is going to be a very freewheeling conversation to talk about how they got into this, some of the great guests they've had, and some of the lessons that they've learned from their guests.
And John, just to brag, I have been one of their guests. So there.
As have I. So
so they've had excellent. Andy's
not
had
to be outdone. Yes, we have both been guests, and I have to say, and I mentioned this, I think, in our promo, that Andy's a really great interviewer. Really, I think he really knows his stuff. So I'm going to do a quick intro on Andy, just to kind of give everyone a little bit of a blurb on this. So by day, Andy runs a marketing company. This is not everything that he does. And Second Act Stories is a passion that he has put together with Scott to chronicle the Second Act career phenomenon. And this archive of interviews that is now into the hundreds has really, I think, shed a much more comprehensive light on the phenomenon. And that really is all I think we need to say. And I will just proceed to bring Andy on. So there he is. There's our friend, Andy Levine. Hey there.
Hey, John. Hey, Carrie. Great to be here. Thank you so much. I am so honored to be on your show. So it's really terrific to see both of you again.
Great.
Fun to turn the tables on you.
Thank you.
So Carrie, why don't you lead off?
Yeah. So Andy, I mean, I'm a huge fan of what you've been doing with your whole initiative there. You've really put together an incredible roster. Can you just share with us a little bit about what got you started down this path, sort of what sparked this interest for you, and any surprises you personally have had along the way with this?
Sure. So I was doing a podcast for work, and I just found that I really enjoyed it. I loved interviewing people. I loved hearing their stories, and it was very business related. And I thought to myself, gee, I'd kind of like to do this, but do it for fun. And I've always been very intrigued by people who have the courage to jump into something new and try something different. And so I thought, I looked around, there really wasn't a show that profiled individuals who were pursuing second acts. And that's how Second Act Stories was born. And we started this in 2018. We've done 121 episodes so far. We try to put one out every 2 weeks, but Scott and I go out and we interview someone always in person. And we talk to them for an hour and a half, sometimes as big as 2 hours. And then we try to distill it down to the 20 minutes or so of the most interesting part of it, and tell their second act story. And our goal is to be inspiring to others to make the leap and to do something different with their lives.
Well, that's hard to do. I think trimming it down has got to be a challenge, because
The
there's so
editing
much
the editing is always a challenge. Absolutely.
Do you have I just want to share a couple of the stories with us to kind of whet the curiosity of people who are listening to us and watching us?
Sure. I just share two, maybe just to get you started here. An earlier one I did was gentleman Chris Donovan, who had been working as a telephone repairman for 25 years. And it kind of was a boring job, but it paid the bills and that sort of thing. Anyway, at the age of 50, he gets prostate cancer, and he sort of wakes up and says, I am going to do what I've always wanted to do for my entire life since high school: design women's shoes. and he just has had this passion for designing women's shoes. He's been sketching them for like 25 plus years, and he says to his partner, "This is what I'm going to do." And it was a long, circuitous route to eventually going to a sort of super high-end school in Milan to learn design. And but that's what he's doing, and he has a very successful collection, and he's made this transition and done very, very well. The second one, I'll just share it because it's fresh in my head. We just released it this morning. A woman, Melissa Davey, who is a senior corporate executive. She worked at a company called Gen X. She was facing a point where her company was being bought out, and she's 65 years old, and it's like, do I want to stay on for another 5 years, or is it time to do something else? At the same time, she won an auction, a charity auction, to spend a day on the set with director M. Night Shyamalan. And so she went and she spent a day on the set with him, fell in love with filmmaking, and went home to her husband that night and said, "I'm going to become a filmmaker." Quit her job, has now one film under her belt, a film called Beyond 60. This is something you could relate to, John, with your background in film, and is in the middle of editing now her second film, which is a film called Climbing into Life. So those are the people we try to look for, people who, really take the leap into something they're passionate about. It's a big change for them, and that gives you a little flavor of what the podcast is all about.
In our pre-show, we talked about some of the categories that you've discovered, and I'm very interested to learn about some of the commonalities that people share around this whole process of making this decision. And one thing which I thought was interesting that you mentioned, and I'd love to hear more of these takeaways, is that about 80% of the people that you've interviewed are planners, where they really decide what they're going to do and they figure this out and they research it. But then 20% are leapers who just jump. So tell us more about some of those categories and the kinds of personalities that tend to fit into one or more of them.
Yeah, they're both interesting categories. The planners, these are people who get an internship, go back to college, read tons and tons of books, get a part-time job somewhere or whatever their passion is to find out about it. But they spend time, and it might be 6 months, it might be 10 years, sort of experimenting how they go about making this change, and they slip into the new bathtub in a slow sort of planned way. In some ways, the leapers are more fun to interview because usually something tremendously bad happens. They lose their job, or they get very frustrated at work, or they lose a spouse, or someone dies, or something like that, and they just decide, I don't want to do this anymore, and I don't know what I want to do, but I'm done with this job that I've had for the last 25 years. And without any financial resources, which would probably make your skin crawl, Carrie, they make the leap and they jump. And interestingly enough, I'm unable to distinguish a higher success rate for one or the other.
That was going to be my follow-up.
They
right.
Both seem to find a way to work this out. Now, maybe that I'm only interviewing the people who are successful at it, but both paths are successful paths. It's been really interesting to see these. Yeah. You mentioned patterns as well, John. The other pattern that I'll share with you, and this really came out of a book that one of our friends, Mark Miller, wrote called Jolt. I find that about half the people I interviewed, they are prompted into a second act by trauma. Something happens that is difficult, is bad. Probably my best example is a woman named Ann Moss Rogers, who ran a very, very successful marketing firm, but her son at the age of 20 committed suicide. And she said, my work is no longer meaningful, trying to help get more leads for plumbers or, whatever she was working in terms of clients. And so she's become a full-time advocate for suicide prevention and she's taken all the skills that she had as a marketing professional to learn how to get her posts up on, when people go to on the web to look up how do I slip my wrists, up comes her post, which is a positive post for, here's why you should reconsider what you're thinking of doing. And she's using her marketing skills to gain that SEO position. So it's a really interesting second act. But anyway, trauma about half the time is what prompts a second act.
Now, I like two things that you just said, Andy. The one is, I think that's an important point for our listeners to understand, is a lot of these second acts are redeploying skills that you do already have in your wheelhouse,
Yep.
that you might not recognize, that these are things that can be transferred to your new adventure. So it's not as daunting as it might seem if you really peel it back a bit. The second thing you said I love is that you focus on the positive stories, the success stories. And I think that is really instructive for people. And I do the same in my work, because I think we learn from the winners. We learn what works. And they're also very apt to tell you exactly what didn't work. But the fact that, they've made it through that setback is a reason why your stories resonate, I think, with so many of us who follow you.
Yeah, I couldn't say more about the transferable skills, just going back to the example, the woman who's the corporate executive, she said, I was super nervous the first time I was at a screening of my film, and at the end I have to do a Q&A as the director. Said, I've stood up before tons of corporate meetings and been able to do this hundreds of times. It's no different. And after doing the first one, it just became super easy for her.
Yeah. No, it becomes such, I just love that, because it makes this the glide path a little bit easier if you think of it that way.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
So do people have regrets? Have you come across people with regrets or things that they would have done differently? I mean, are you able to kind of drill down beneath their willingness to share their second act success to get a little squishy?
Yeah. I think 100% of the people I've interviewed are way happier in their second act. I can't think of a single person. I can think of one. I can think of one person who felt the second act was not a positive move for them. But 120 out of 121, are very, very positive and upbeat and feeling good. I would say the vast majority are making less money than they were in their first act, and so they haven't given up a paycheck, but their paycheck is smaller, or else their paycheck is, I'm doing 100 different little gigs they're not quite adding up to what I used to make in my full-time, either corporate job or whatever I was doing. But they're much happier. They're much, much happier overall, and they're willing to sacrifice whatever that income loss happened to be.
Andy, one of the things I found with the second actors I've worked with and interviewed is that a lot of them told me that if there was one thing they wish they had done differently, they wish they had had more sales experience. That if they hadn't at some point in their life been a salesperson, like I sold Avon. I mean, but if they wish that they had somehow, because even if they hired somebody to do their marketing for them, you still are selling yourself. You're selling your business. And I thought that was really an interesting, I hadn't thought about that before I started to ask that of people. And the other thing that you probably hear this too, they all say they wish they had more money when they started, because it always takes more than you think it's going to, but it doesn't have to be hugely expensive. I'm not trying to scare people off, but it's always, more money is always better.
A lot of people that I've interviewed come from a corporate background, and to suddenly be completely on their own, just expanding upon your comment about the sales experience, that is oftentimes a skill that they did not have. And, to go from, supervising 100 people or 500 people, tons of direct reports coming to them, and now it's just them in a extra bedroom. It's a big change, and figuring out how to sell yourself is different than selling the widget that your company manufactured or the service that your company provided.
That last point is something which in my practice I find is perhaps the biggest stumbling block that people have, is leaving a company, leaving a large team, friends, years of being in that pace to doing something that is, again, as you say, more personal, more freelance, more entrepreneurial. Do people have you kind of figured out what those steps are that people can take to make that transition more palatable, easier, and less perhaps discouraging?
Yeah, I think the best way that I've found, and this falls more into that planner category, is if you can find a way to start this as a side hustle. It gives you a little bit of cushion. The one that comes immediately to mind is a guy who he was a sales executive actually in the Marriott Corporation, but what he loved doing is being a DJ at parties. And so he was able to hold down the full-time job for as long as he could, and just start doing lots of DJing jobs on the weekends. And he got to a point where he said, I can just about replace the income. But he sort of slipped into it slowly over maybe a 3 or 5 year period. And starting things off as a side hustle, rather than just going cold turkey, is a really good path to going about this.
And I like, Andy, I know and all three of us know Marcy Albaher pretty well from encore.org. And Marcy talks a lot, and Encore is doing a lot of intergenerational work, the gen to gen work. And I wondered in your course of travels and meeting these fabulous second actors, what are you seeing in terms of intergenerational partnerships or working between the generations that sort of, ignited their businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I see tons of that. Just to go with a specific example, I interviewed a woman, Nassim Alakhani, who grew up in Iran, fell in love with cooking, but then raised a family for 20 years. And when her kids were going away to college, she said, I want to start a restaurant. So at 59, she starts a restaurant. She had a terribly rough time of it because she had no experience running a restaurant until she found a guy who was like 30 years old, who had been running a restaurant, also Iranian, who'd been running restaurants and working in the restaurant business for 10 years. And he brought that experience. So, he's like half her age, but between her and this guy, Chef Ali, they were able to make a run of it and make it work. And I find lots of examples like that of intergenerational partnership, and they're learning from each other. She knew the Iranian cooking that she had learned as a child. He knew how to run a restaurant, and the two of them together, pooled their knowledge and abilities, and the restaurant has been wildly successful. It's been reviewed by the New York Times, Food and Wine, and you almost can't get in there. So it's a great story.
What's the name again?
The name of the restaurant is called Sofra. It's a Persian restaurant in Brooklyn. And
okay, we'll just there.
it's a fantastic place. I was there with a group of friends about 3 weeks ago, and we had a wonderful meal. So it was terrific.
Hey, did you end up talking to those gals in Youngstown, One Hot Cookie?
I did a podcast on One Hot Cookie. That's
the mother-daughter, right?
Mother-daughter, yes. And
yeah.
as you probably know you wrote about them for one of your books. There's so many, it's hard to keep track, Gary.
Yeah.
But this was a woman who was kind of down on her luck and did not have a lot of financial resources, and launched One Hot Cookie on just a shoestring, and has been really successful. What she's found is sort of the path to success is the mail order business, which has worked out really well for her.
She partnered with her daughter. They used to make cookies together. She was a single mom, and her daughter's part of it. The two of them are working together. I just think it's you do have these family intergenerational businesses that you look around and you're within your own circle and say, hey, that might be fun.
Yeah, no, it's a great story, and thank you for suggesting it. I traveled out to Youngstown to interview him.
Yeah. You did? Oh, fabulous. Yeah.
So this brings up another question, which I get a lot around the passion project. And, you talked about side gigs and this question of follow your bliss and the money will follow, which I'm not much of a fan of. But it's a big question, I think, for a lot of people in terms of trying to find their passion, trying to find something that's going to be sustaining, particularly if they're going to be making less money at it. what have you discovered around this question of passion? Is it really necessary to be passionate about jumping into a second act, or I like to think that usefulness and kind of connecting with a market or connecting with an audience is really the way you find the passion. But what have your interviewees experienced along these lines?
I think passion is the single critical element to success in this is and you have to sort of discover and sort of find your passion. And sometimes it's going back to something that you loved as a child. I've interviewed a lot of people that, I used to do a lot of acting in high school, and I then gave that up to become an accountant. And now I'm in my 50s. I'm going to go back to acting. And so that sort of thing comes up all the time. But finding your passion, then pursuing it. I do
getting
find
paid
that
for it.
in getting paid for it, yes, even if it's less money than we are getting before, is very critical. I want to go back to one thing I said earlier. I mentioned there was one where someone was less happy, and just to your question of passion, John, this sort of is relevant. This is a gentleman who was a police officer in Dallas, and he loved being a police officer, the sense of community. But someone came to him and said, I have a corporate job. I think you'd be perfect. It's kind of a real estate / security job. And he made the transition to it. And he made like 3 times the amount of money he was making before. It wasn't enough. He missed being a police officer. Now, what he found was I was able to replace that passion by doing community work, by being in the Boy Scouts, by being all these other things. So he found a way to replace that. But, going into sort of a corporate real estate position, security position, he couldn't replace the sort of juice that he got out of being a police officer.
Yeah.
So that's
really,
one incident where they're, sort of less successful.
So we're using this word passion, but we could also be using the words purpose and meaning.
Yep, absolutely. A number of the people I've interviewed, they have been nominated and are CNN heroes. And those are in some ways the most wonderful ones to profile.
Right, those
Just
are great stories.
Giving you one other example, this a woman, Kathy Hying in St. Paul, Minnesota. She was a social worker, and she observed this trend that people their car would break down, they couldn't get to work, they would lose their job, and then they would be thrown out on the street and go into homelessness. So at the age of 38, she decided, I need to learn how to become an auto mechanic. That's the way I can stop this cycle.
Wow.
So she didn't really know anything about, fixing cars or whatever. So suddenly she goes to the Dunwoody, School of Auto Mechanics. She's in a room with 25 18-year-old gearheads, and she's this 38-year-old lesbian in the middle of this group. And she said, first couple of days is like, I've made a horrible mistake. She tried to quit. Her professor wouldn't let her. Said, no, I know why you're doing this. So anyway, she's gone on to create something called the Link Garage, which they will fix your car if you can show that you're below the poverty line, for like 1/5 the cost of what it would normally be. And she's keeping people,
Wow.
in their homes by doing this. So a great example of finding meaning, finding purpose. Just, I love that story.
And being unbelievably useful.
Unbelievably useful. Yeah.
Now,
And
Andy,
who would have thought? Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I
was
just
just
said,
gonna
who
say
would have
that-
thought that this, learning auto mechanics was just a really interesting decision that she made.
Yeah, it's brave. But when I'm thinking of that too, is we're talking about meaning and purpose and doing good work. And I think I found that during the pandemic, a lot of people had this opportunity to do that inner MRI and that soul searching about what really mattered to them and what they want to be doing with their life moving forward. And I just was curious what you and your partner have discovered in these interviews of anyone coming through the pandemic, lessons of how they kept their business afloat or started a business, or how that sort of introspective, the shock of it all changed the way they approached their businesses, or essentially stayed in business. Those are kind of two different questions, but
Yeah. I don't know, sort of stayed in business, but I mean, to me, what's been the most interesting group of workers in the pandemic have been the people in the restaurant or food service business, because and this is it's just a tremendously difficult business to be in. A lot of times you're working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and the pay isn't great, and the hours are terrible, and that sort of thing. And then of course all the restaurants shut down. They're just like, maybe you're switching to takeout, but all the restaurants shut down, and everyone gets laid off. A lot of people just haven't come back. They've said, it's time to do something else. I'm going to go into IT. I'm going to go into, a different sort of field. I'm interviewing someone in the coming weeks who, basically started their own plant shop just because they have always had a passion for that and just said, I've had it with the restaurant business. I think the pandemic has caused a lot of people to reflect on, I want a better life. I want better balance in my life, and my previous job or my current job didn't have that. Time to do something different. And because there, basically something like, twice as many jobs out there as there are people seeking jobs in America right now, there's a lot of opportunity. They can not exactly write their own ticket, but they have more opportunities than they did 10 years ago.
Right.
I think that's true, particularly if their skills are relevant or they've kept them up to date.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
I honestly think there's a tremendous job market for experienced workers who do have skills that are relevant today, and they can step in and do those jobs, even if it's a career transition. But as we talked about earlier, Andy, that idea of redeploying in a new direction is really relevant today.
Absolutely. Yep.
So we're starting to wind down here a little bit. I've got one question that I've been burning to ask you, Andy, about your second act, and what you're going to be doing either with the podcast going forward, but also just in your life. How are you? What have you learned from interviewing these 100+ people, and how are you going to apply it to your own situation?
It's such a great question, John. So, I for my day job, as you mentioned in the introduction, I run a marketing firm, and I'm in the process of sort of moving out of that. I have two partners who are buying me out, and so I will exit that. And as I have been interviewing all these people about second acts, I decided what I wanted to do is to try a bunch of different things. So I got very involved in local government here and tried that out. I found I was horrible at that. I didn't enjoy it. I'm not going to pursue that. But I found the podcast, which I love. I coach a cross-country team, which I really enjoy. And so I am trying, I started a small company, which frankly didn't work out. So I'm, if I'm my batting average here is I'm like 2 for 4 on second acts that I've tried. And my path was to try a bunch of different things and find the ones I'm most interested in. A little different than many of the people that I interview, but I pick up something every single interview I do. I'll always say, wow, that's a neat bit of wisdom that I've been given today.
So do you have like a little notebook
I love
where
leaving those.
Do you put all these, like a list of the wisdom for Andy notebook where you put these little nuggets down for this person, this person, this person? You're gonna like put it all together.
Well, it's if I had more wisdom, I probably would do that. But they're just everyone I interview, there's something that I find that this little nugget that sticks in the back of my head, and I've learned from. So it's I would just say it's a fascinating group of people to interview, and I've just been very blessed to be able to meet all these cool, interesting people.
Wonderful. Well, this brings us to the coming soon portion of our show. I'm just going to put up our card to tell you all who we're going to be interviewing next. So this is coming up on September 21st. That's 2 weeks. Lawrence Kosick, who is the co-founder of Get Set Up, which is this relatively new online educational service that is aimed squarely at second actors and people who are trying to learn new skills and open up new opportunities for this phase of life. So very interesting to hear his perspective. similar in a way to yours, and that he's dealing with lots of people who are trying to reinvent, but obviously from a different perspective with a very specific training focus. So there we go, another second act show.
Quickly,
Carrie,
John, can
us out.
Andy? Oh, wait 1 second. Can Andy just tell us the best way for people to tap into his show so they can watch the show?
Thank you.
If you want to listen to the podcast, it's www.secondactstories.org. And I'll leave you with one final thought. You're never too old to make a change. I've interviewed people in their 60s, 70s, 80s who've made a successful change. So that's a cop-out. You're never too old to make a change.
I love it. Yay.
Can't end on a better note. So thank you so much,
guys.
Andy Levine, for being on the Second Act Show. And Carrie, we will get together. We'll see you next time, everybody.
Next time.
Thank
Bye,
you, guys.
everyone. Take care.